Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for September 19th, 2020, recorded around 4:26 p.m. Eastern Time. While taking a look across the tropics right now, we have two main systems that we're going to be focusing on today. Tropical Storm Beta in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico and Hurricane Teddy to the southeast of Bermuda, which will be rapidly approaching Bermuda and then heading towards the Canadian Maritimes over the next several days as it gets caught up in this larger front. We'll talk about all that here in a moment. Focusing solely on Tropical Storm Beta currently in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico, you can see that the storm structure is a little bit kind of sheared out. We do have this upper level trough that is positioned across the northern parts of the storm right now. This is kind of hindering the storm from really taking off. You can see some southeasterly shear being imparted, or some southwesterly shear rather, being imparted on our storm. And this is going to help to push the thunderstorms and the deep convection off towards the north and east. But we can see, however, that we do have thunderstorm development and convection developing around the center of circulation this afternoon and evening. And we've continued to see that progress throughout the day. The hurricane hunters will fly in later this evening, I believe, and we'll get a better idea of what's going on under the hood, so to speak. Now we can see on the larger kind of satellite animation here, this is a zoomed out look. We can see that this overall trough feature that's kind of digging in through here, you can see the back side of the trough is relatively filled with dry ambient air, and the kind of the leaning edge side and in front of it is filled with this very moist, unstable atmosphere. So you have this trough, and then the jet trough, or kind of the jet maximum, is in through here at the kind of the northeast quadrant of this trough. So the axis can reasonably be inferred that the trough is somewhere in through here at the moment, and just looking at the satellite imagery. But we can tell that our storm is being sheared apart to the north and east. Our thunderstorm convection is. That's in part thanks because of southwesterly shear, but that is starting to let up a little bit today. We can see more convection trying to fire near the center of circulation. And this does have the potential to strengthen into a hurricane over the next several days or so as it moves kind of very slowly off towards the west and then eventually, or northwest, slowly turning back towards Texas here over the next couple of days. We can also see that we have a very strong ridge axis pumping in a lot of moisture across northeast Florida today. This ridge is building in, causing stiff winds and some rip current and coastal flooding problems along the coast of Florida. This is kind of indirectly related to the indirect impacts from Hurricane Teddy that is causing swells from Florida all the way up through the northeast, all the way up to Maine in the Canadian Maritimes. Those swells will be only increasing as time goes on, and we'll start to see more of those effects to the southeast and northeast over the next several days or so. Now, as for the steering currents here regarding Tropical Storm Beta, again, there's a lot of things here that we still don't necessarily know, but the models have come into better agreement today. First of all, our storm is kind of positioned at the weakness of a ridge. We can see that this trough is kind of in through here, and your axis is kind of dotted in through here at the moment. So what you actually have right now is a very weak ridge that's trying to build back in over the western portions of the western half of America right now. And we also have a trough to the kind of south and east right now of Beta, which is partially being eroded here by powerful Hurricane Teddy. And we can see that as time progresses, our storm actually dips maybe a little bit to the south and west here. Now that's entirely possible, but not super likely. But if this ridge does happen to be a little bit stronger, or this ridge happens to be a little bit stronger, it could actually turn the storm south and west, which is kind of seen here on the GFS forecast at hour 24. Now, after that time, what happens again? This ridge is not a very strong ridge, but it's just strong enough that it's forcing our storm to the west a little bit. You can see our storm's not that strong, about 1,000 millibars. because there will be some dry air and whatnot, but this eventually does find a pathway to strengthen. Of course, Hurricane Teddy out here, which we'll talk about there in a moment. But again, we can see that this ridge really isn't all that strong, but it is pushing our storm over towards Texas here. And now that our storm is a little bit more towards the north and east today, it may actually allow a storm to make landfall in Texas. And we've started to see that here in the model field today. Now, if we look here at the H-WRF, this is the 700 to 400 relative humidity product here on the H-WRF. And we can see that this is out to about 7 o'clock this morning. We'll jump this out here to about 2 p.m. So we notice that what's actually happening, this is all of the dry air associated with the trough. And we can see all this dry air in red, and in the moisture, well, that's actually shown up in brown, highlighted in the red color. And we can also see the moisture field here in this green. And we can see all of this moisture that's kind of being pumped in. And again, if we go back to the visible satellite, we can see that there is deep convection firing near the Louisiana coastline, all the way through portions of southeast or southwest Florida and the Florida Panhandle. And this is all in response because this moisture field on the H-WRF, and we can see how that's playing out. This moisture field, it's sitting over very warm waters, and that's allowing our storm to pump in moisture around the storm, and that's helping to induce showers and thunderstorms all the way from Louisiana through portions of Florida and even into Georgia. And unfortunately, this is going to bring some impacts to those places that were already impacted by Hurricane Laura and Sally. Obviously, with Sally just being a couple of days ago, and it being, a little bit more than a month since Hurricane Laura. But, some of these places that were impacted are going to feel impacts, somewhat indirectly from the kind of outer bands of Tropical Storm Beta. Now, we can see if we push this forward here, what actually ends up kind of happening is we do get this trough. Obviously, our trough isn't through here, or it's kind of lifting out at this time, but it just leaves behind a very deep pool of dry air. And we can now start to see on the H-WRF, this is by early tomorrow morning, we start to have this dry air being wrapped around into the center of circulation. And that is because, of course, a circulation is a counterclockwise kind of turning in the atmosphere. And this dry air to the north is going to feel that tug around the vortex and eventually get wrapped around into the center of circulation here. And we can see that happen on the model, but it does look to kind of keep a little bit of its inner core structure, that being, Beta keeps its inner core structure and is down into the low 990s at this point. Now, whether or not it really intensifies remains to be seen. There is going to be another bout of shear that is going to increase at the landfall time. But we know how Hurricane Sally was much of the same way. It was very sheared, really all the way up until landfall, but the shear decreased just enough that our storm rapidly intensified to 105 miles per hour right before landfall. And obviously the surge and the rain, that was a very big problem. And we can see that we might have another similar kind of appearance where we get this dry air to kind of maybe wrap in a little bit of shear, but our storm may be able to kind of fend off, and our storm kind of remains in the low 990s all the way up until landfall here on Monday. Now, this is a little bit faster than others, but it is possible, and you can kind of see our storm just kind of sit there, and all the while it keeps pumping in moisture all the way from Texas, Oklahoma, all the way back here into the Gulf of Mexico, with these sea surface temperatures being very warm. Of course, our moisture axis just remains around here, and unfortunately, some places that are impacted by Laura and Sally kind of get a surge of moisture, and obviously that's one thing that we don't necessarily need, but that is a very real possibility. So there remains impacts that do seem likely. You can see another Eastern Pacific hurricane here, but it does seem possible that we might get a decent amount of rainfall across this area over the next several days or so. Currently, the official Hurricane Center forecast does bring this to hurricane intensity at landfall point somewhere near Galveston Bay, it seems, by 7 p.m. late Monday evening, and then weakens it down to a tropical storm, but keeps it around for the next several days into Louisiana. Now, for this reason, not only do we have tropical storm watches and warnings from right around portions of western Louisiana all the way down through Morgan City, Galveston, etc. We do have a hurricane watch that is in effect here from really Galveston just to the south and near the Louisiana-Texas border. We do have a hurricane watch for the possibility that this could become a hurricane and make landfall as a hurricane at landfall. Tropical storm watches all the way down to near Brownsville and Corpus Christi at this time. But you can see how large this cone is, because it is possible that we could see a track something like this where, our storm kind of just mills around it here, or our storm could get pushed further westward, make landfall, stay inland, and just be a rain threat over the next several days, but without a real storm making its way into Louisiana as sort of a double landfall. So it does appear somewhat likely that the second option might be coming more to fruition, that we get a storm to come in through here and kind of mills around, but it moves far enough inland that we don't actually have a storm making it into Louisiana. And the Hurricane Center is now starting to buy that second solution as well, with a storm scraping the coastline here of Texas and making landfall, and then moving into Louisiana as a weak storm or depression at that time. The one thing, though, that this is going to bring is a tremendous amount of rainfall over the next several days. And you can see that, fortunately, areas like the Florida Panhandle don't have to deal with this very much, but portions of eastern Louisiana all the way through western Louisiana, portions of Texas obviously have to deal with this. And this is going to be what appears to be a very significant flooding event shaping up for portions of Louisiana and Texas. You can see 15 inches of rain is possible right near the Bolivar Peninsula down towards Galveston, obviously, even approaching 6 to 10 inches near Houston. So this is a very real problem, and this is going to bring significant life-threatening impacts, whether this is a hurricane at landfall or whether this is a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. Some places could even receive upwards of 20 inches out here, and you can see even some 20 inches scattered just south of Louisiana. So if this does manage to produce this amount of rainfall, there's going to be significant consequences on top of storm surge that could already be, 2 to 4 feet in some locations. So it's very important to understand that this is going to have real consequences. Even if this is a weak tropical storm and not even a hurricane, this is going to have significant consequences in the storm surge, or not in the storm surge, but in the rainfall department. This could produce upwards of 15 to 20 inches across some locations. And again, even all the way in through New Orleans could see, isolated amounts up to 6 inches of rainfall, 4 to 6 inches across this area. And of course, down through Morgan City, towards the west, you could see anywhere from about 10 to 20 inches of rain across this area, especially the further west you get, closer to the landfall point. So this is going to be something heavily to monitor. And of course, if you are told to evacuate or whatever, you just need to take this very seriously, because this is going to be a life-threatening situation. Maybe not so much from the standpoint of, the winds, but this is more going to be a heavy rainfall flooding event. We saw how that worked with Harvey. We saw how this worked with Imelda, both producing over 40 inches of rainfall, and we are now seeing another kind of situation shaping up that this could produce upwards of 15 to 20 plus inches of rain. So it's important that do not focus necessarily on whether it's a tropical depression or storm, but focus on the rainfall, the storm surge, and the wind all combined, and put it into and assess your threat in your situation. So heed advice from officials, and stay tuned to the Hurricane Center for official updates, obviously from the Hurricane Center. Now with Hurricane Teddy, maximum sustained winds have decreased a little bit down to about 125 miles per hour. Still a powerful Category 3 major hurricane in the Atlantic Basin. We can see on the satellite we do have a rebuilding inner core structure today. It looks like that Teddy did actually undergo an eye wall replacement cycle yesterday, and was able to finish this afternoon. So it took a little bit, but now the inner core structure is trying to rebuild again. You can see these showers and thunderstorms rebuilding, this deep convection rebuilding near the center, with an eye now trying to kind of clear out once again. So this is indicative that the storm is starting to strengthen once again. A very uniform central dense overcast region, somewhat of an asymmetrical eye, but again, it is now starting to clear out after that eye wall replacement cycle has finished. Deep convection firing all near the storm, and these spiraling rain bands obviously well out from the center. And I can see that this is a pretty large storm kind of expanse here, but again, one of the main things is that this is going to be producing swells that radiate outward over the next several days, and this is going to impact Bermuda too. If we look at the GFS steering flow at the 500 millibar level, we do have a ridge that's kind of to the north, but we can see that what's happening is we do have a trough right now across the Canadian Maritimes and New England, and this trough is going to be sliding down out here and cutting off into a separate cutoff flow over this area. And a cutoff flow basically means that this area is going to become cut off from the parent trough, which is up here. We can see this happen on the GFS forecast that by hour 48, this is Monday, we have this upper level low that's positioned here and a ridge to the north and a ridge to the northwest here and northeast. So we have a ridge trying to encompass our storm. This mainly forces a cutoff from the main trough here. We get this cutoff circulation. Now this trough, watch what happens. It's going to send the storm on a slingshot around to the northwest here. And that's very important because this keeps it on a trajectory. We can see here that by this time, this kind of trough slingshots our storm to the northwest here. That kind of slingshots our storm to the Canadian Maritimes. But finally here, this is valid by Tuesday, our storm actually gets to the north of this upper level low that is positioned somewhere down in here. So now our storm is going to want to move our storm to the north and eventually northeast. Now this is what's probably keeping it away from Maine and also keeping it from turning all the way back into New England and Maine. Instead, our storm is going to go up more to the north, something like that, and then bend back to the north and east here. And we can see this happen. This skirts the Canadian Maritimes and just briefly kind of skirts it, but this is going to bring very significant impacts. It's becoming less and less likely that the Canadian Maritimes, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia region will kind of avoid significant impacts. Whether or not this is a fully tropical cyclone, which it likely won't be, doesn't really matter because this is still going to bring powerful winds, heavy rain, surge. That whole 9 yards is still going to be there with a storm that is undergoing a transition from a warm core tropical low to a kind of a mid-latitude upper level cyclone. And that's what this is going to do. And we can see this plotted on the official forecast. That this remains a hurricane all the way on approach, finally undergoing extratropical transition, will likely be a very still a strong hurricane at this moment, coming through kind of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, weakening to a tropical storm, and then out once again out into the open way far North Atlantic, where obviously it will just be caught in the easterly. So you can see there is a tropical storm warning for Bermuda because this is expected to pass pretty close, and tropical storm conditions are going to be felt well outside of where this actually makes landfall or actually kind of tracks. And we can see even here, there will likely probably be maybe some watches and warnings that go up here for the Canadian Maritimes. Either way, this is likely to be a very powerful system as it transitions over across this area. And remember Hurricane Dorian back last year, how it became an extratropical cyclone through here, but paved the way for very significant impacts as it transitioned. This will be much in the same way, bringing very significant impacts as it transitions. So, obviously, if you live there, obviously stay tuned to the official forecast, heed official advice from your local weather service office and local officials. With that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.